Okay, so we finished male and female reproductive system, and we talked about preparing the uterine lining for pregnancy, and now we're going to look at pregnancy and growth and development. So again, the sperm and that secondary oocyte get together in fertilization, and they form what's called a zygote, and pregnancy begins. And after 38 weeks, which is not 9 months, by the way, you have a baby born. Humans will grow. There's an increase in size, an increase in the number of cells, and that's growth. And then you get development, which includes aging and this process that the individual goes through as they age. The prenatal period is from fertilization to birth. The postnatal period is from birth until you die. So fertilization, the union of the secondary oocyte and the sperm, and this takes place again in that infundibulum, or the first third of that uterine tube. This is what we want, where we want it to occur. And before fertilization can occur, the secondary oocyte must be ovulated and enter that tube. The sperm will travel from the vaginal area through the cervix and the body of the uterus into the uterine tube. The oocyte survives, as I mentioned, about 12 to 24 hours after ovulation. The closer to the 12, the better it is. And the sperm can reach the oocyte within about an hour of being introduced into the vaginal area. Now, what's interesting is that in the ejaculation, you're going to get hundreds of millions of sperm ejaculated, but only a few hundred will actually reach the oocyte. The vaginal area is a tough area for the sperm, okay? It's a tough area. And the sperm can survive about 6 days in that female tract. One sperm to fertilize the oocyte. That's it. Once one gets in, it's closed for everybody else. The sperm will invade what's called the corona radiata. It will dissolve it with those enzymes that are in the acromosome of the head of that sperm. And the sperm will digest what's called the zona pellucida, this glycoprotein layer that surrounds that oocyte. And basically what you're going to have is hundreds of these sperm hitting the egg. And I've got a picture, and they hit it, but only one sperm actually penetrates the membrane. Once the sperm enters, the zona pellucida hardens and prevents any other sperm from getting in. And the sperm nucleus enters the oocyte, and finally, we have meiosis 2 completes. And so now we have basically a fertilized egg that is now a zygote, and it has the 46 chromosomes. Okay. So then we're into a pregnancy, and obviously, basically that fertilized egg will move down the fallopian tube. Hopefully, we do not want that fertilized egg to implant in the uterine tube. That is called an ectopic pregnancy. That is a life-threatening situation for the mother. But once you get into the uterus, that prenatal period usually lasts 38 weeks, and it's divided into 3 stages: the pre-embryonic stage, the embryonic stage, and the fetal stage. The pre-embryonic stage lasts 2 weeks, and all mammals go through this. Basically, you go through what's called cleavage, which is you get very rapid cell division of that zygote, and basically the cells are called blastomeres, when you get about 16 cells, you get this solid mass of about 16 cells, and that moves into the uterus. And then you get the formation of what's called a blastocyst. That mass hollows out and becomes a hollow ball that it attaches to the endometrium of the uterus. And when you do that, you get what's called an inner cell mass, which gives rise to the embryo itself. And then you get a trophoblast, which are the cells forming the wall of that blastocyst, and they develop into the structures that help this embryo and produce HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, which is the test that we use to test whether you're pregnant or not. And it also helps to maintain the corpus luteum during early pregnancy, because you need the placenta hasn't formed. You need estrogen and progesterone to be produced to maintain the pregnancy, because again, if the estrogen progesterone drops off, the lining of the uterus is sloughed, and if that is sloughed, the baby goes with it. That is a miscarriage. And so we need that human chorionic gonadotropin to tell the corpus luteum continue to make estrogen and progesterone so that the pregnancy is maintained until the placenta can take over that production, until that baby can do that. All right, so you can see some of these stages. And here's that early stage, and you can see the development, and you can see that blastocyst there. All right, so implantation is where the blastocyst actually attaches to the uterine lining, and it secretes these enzymes that digest part of that endometrium. And actually it invades in that endometrium, and the endometrium, it literally surrounds that blastocyst. And this usually occurs somewhere in the end of the first week or the end of the second week, somewhere in that second week. And that trophoblast again begins producing HCG to keep the corpus luteum viable. And it also prevents the blastocyst from being rejected by the immune system. But the main thing is to keep that pregnancy viable. The placenta will form from the endometrium and the cells surrounding the embryo. And it actually attaches the embryo to the uterine wall. And this is where we're going to get an exchange of nutrients and gases and waste between the embryo and the mother. So you can see that inner cell mass there, and there's the trophoblast, and it begins to invade in the tissues. And then you get formation of what are called extraembryonic membranes. First of all, you're going to chorion. This is the outermost membrane, and you get projections that grow out of it and invade the endometrium, and they become what's called the chorionic villi. You can actually test the chorionic villi to determine whether there is a problem with the baby. You also get the amnion, which is the second extraembryonic membrane that develops around the embryo about the second week, and that begins to fill with amniotic fluid. And this fluid fills that space and cushions and protects that baby and keeps that baby at a constant temperature. The amniotic cavity will get really large, and that amnion will contact the chorion, and they will fuse together eventually. Okay. You also get the yolk sac. This is the membrane that forms during the second week, and this is what's going to start to form the blood cells. So blood cells initially form in the yolk sac, eventually move to the liver, and finally into the bone marrow as the bones develop. Another extraembryonic membrane is the allantois, which forms during the third week between the yolk sac and basically the connecting area, and forms the blood cells in the umbilical blood vessels. And then we have the placenta, which forms this area where the chorion touches the uterine wall, and it contains the embryonic and maternal portions. This is where the blood vessels are going and everything is getting together, because the placental membrane is going to separate the embryonic blood from the maternal blood, but we are able to exchange gases and nutrients and that sort of thing. The blood from the embryo will not get into mom's circulation until the placenta is torn away. So there is a placental, maternal barrier, but we have to have respiratory gases and everything exchanged between the mother and the embryo because baby can't breathe. We need oxygen. So you can see that amnion and the chorionic villi there. Okay. And you can see this membrane, and you can see this circulation of how this comes in. Okay, so again, the zygote basically forms 12 to 24 hours following ovulation. You see cleavage, this increase in cell numbers from 30 hours to the third day. You start to see the morula at about the fourth day, and this blastocyst that we talked about, this hollow ball that forms. And then you go into a gastrula, which is about the end of the second week, and this is where you get the primary, what we call the primary germ layers that form, the 3 primary germ layers that are going to form into the actual organs of the baby. Okay, so in gastrulation you get the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm of the embryo, which begin to form. Okay, and that's, those are all the tissue layers that the organs form from. Okay, the ectoderm forms the nervous system, epidermis, hair, nails, so and so. The mesoderm is the middle, the major organs in the center, the blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, reproductive organs, kidneys, and so on. Endoderm forms the pancreas, the gallbladder, and linings of the digestive tract, the respiratory tract, and so on. So this is why mothers have to be very careful about what they take during this time, because this is when you're forming this stuff. So you don't want to take anything that would affect the development of the baby during that time. And so you can see these critical periods. And you can look at some of the causes of birth defects. I mean, thalidomide, they don't use anymore. This came out in the 60s and caused major birth defects. But German measles causes major birth defects too, and this is why we want people to take the rubella vaccine. And you can see some of these other problems. A Zika virus, that was, that's been out in the last few years and causes a small brain. So anything that could affect the development of those layers and those tissues, that can cause problems. The fetus begins at the end of the 8th week. So in the 8th week, you're basically fetus. Growth is very rapid. The beginning of the stage, the head is big. The limbs are short, but the head is big. And basically the body lengthens out and the growth of the head slows. And by the 12th week, you're getting the external reproductive organs can be distinguished. So about the 12th week, you can do an ultrasound and determine whether it's a male or female if the baby's laying right. And you can go through this development. And basically, most everything is developed in those that first and second trimester. And that third trimester is for the baby to gain weight and get fat and the skin to smooth out, but basically for that baby to gain weight. The organs are specialized, they do grow, they start to mature, but the initial formation is done before that final trimester. The digestive system, respiratory systems are the last to mature. The liver is still a little immature when you're born, just FYI. So the fetal circulation, maternal blood supplies the oxygen and the nutrients and removes the waste. The umbilical vein transports the oxygen-rich blood from the placenta to the fetus. And we mentioned this, the foraminal valley, when we talked about the heart. This is the opening in the right and left atria in that fetal heart so that you bypass the lungs. And the ductus venosus bypasses the liver because these things aren't functioning. So you're going to do bypasses. There's a ductus arteriosus. This is, again, a shunt that shunts most of the blood from the pulmonary trunk directly into the aorta. We're going to bypass the lungs because mom's going to provide that. Mama is going to take the waste products and get the oxygen to the baby and take the CO2 away. The baby's lungs are not functioning, okay? So the blood in the aorta at the baby is a mixture of oxygen rich and oxygen poor. And, because mama is taking care of that. Just FYI. Okay, so we're done.